观众朋友们，大家好，我是 Word Up Dr.J, and I want to welcome you to the Dr.J Word Up Literature Lair. 让我们一起听故事学英文。Now today, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to share a story with you that almost every single English-speaking student on the entire planet Earth must read in school. Now, like you know, with Dr. J's Word Up Literature Lair, you can learn a lot of interesting English words and expressions by studying stories. And at the same time, you can improve your listening skills and gain all of the advantages that you will have if you become a really good 学霸, like all of our students. Okay, now at the end, we're going to review the useful vocabulary words, expressions, and quotes that will help you get better grades on your exams, also learn more English for fun. Okay, now Pride and Prejudice was written by Jane Austen in 1797, and it was published in 1813. And wait, I'm going to tell you a secret. Nobody really knew that it was Jane Austen, a female, who wrote the stories. Interesting, huh? Now, this very long novel is about a woman named Elizabeth, also referred to as Eliza or Lily. And she was one of the 5 daughters in a lower aristocratic Bennet family. And this is a family that was living in the countryside with no sons. This is very important because at the time, women could not legally inherit land, money, anything. Women could not inherit anything, only the men could. So it was very 非常的重男轻女的社会. Okay, so this explains a lot of the story and why Mrs. Bennet, Liza, Lizzie, Elizabeth's mother, was pressuring all of her daughters to get married to wealthy men. And the main reason, like I said, was to ensure that they did not lose their family's property, because their property, their estate, belonged to the cousin of the father. Okay, now the first line of the story is very important because everybody, 大家都知道这句话. Here we go. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man, 单身贵族, in possession of a good fortune, must be in want of a wife. However, little known the feelings or views of such a man, maybe on his first entering a neighborhood. This truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered the rightful property of one or other of their daughters. 那这是什么意思？意思就是说，那个人是好人还是坏人没有关系。那所有的有女儿的家庭，他们都很想让他们的女儿跟他结婚呢。OK， 因为一起好家人啊。
My dear Mr. Bennet, said Mrs. Bennet, the mother of the 5 women about whom this book is written, and who she wanted someone to marry so the family could remain a high-ranking social family and not lose everything. Jane, Elizabeth, Mary, Kitty, and Lydia said to her husband one day, "Have you heard that Netherfield Park is let or rented at last?"
Mr. Bennet made no answer. 他不想回答。Do you not want to know who has taken it? Cried his wife impatiently. 你不想知道是谁吗？ You want to tell me, and I have no objection to hearing it. 我知道你很想跟我讲，但是我不想听。Why, my dear, you must know. Mrs. Long says that Netherfield, the greatest estate of the area, is taken or rented by a young man of large fortune from the north of England. He is to take possession before Michaelmas, and some of his servants are to be in the house by the end of next week.
What's his name? Bingley. Is he married or single? Oh, single, my dear, to be sure. You must know that I'm thinking of his marrying one of our daughters. Everyone in the Longbourn estate, where the Bennets lived, was excited to know that Netherfield Park, the greatest estate or property of the neighborhood, was to be rented out by Mr. Bingley, a rich and handsome young bachelor who had made his fortune doing manufacturing. 所以他们知道这个很有那个后家人来呀，他要跟谁结婚的呢？我们都不知道。Now, Mr. Bingley and his party were invited to attend a big fancy dance called the ball at the village's assembly rooms. And when the ball began and the Netherfield party entered into the room, the people there consisted of only 5 people. Mr. Bingley, his 2 sisters, the husband of one of the sisters, and another young man, whose name was Darcy. Mr. Bingley was a good-looking and gentlemanlike man. 他就是很有那种很有 feel 的感觉，他就很帅，对不对？ And he had a pleasant countenance, a face, and easy, unaffected manners. 他就是走路这样很轻松的。His sisters were fine women with an air of decided fashion. But his friend, Mr. Darcy, soon drew the attention of the room by his fine, tall person and his noble mien, and the report, which was in general circulation within 5 minutes of his entrance, that he made about £10,000 a year. 所以我们都知道 Mr. Darcy 是那种高富帅，很有钱，但是他的人呢？ Now, Mr. Darcy was looked at with great admiration for about half of the night, until his manners gave the disgust that turned the tide of his popularity. 大家开始觉得他很烦了， for he was found to be proud and above his company. 他真的看不起别人 and he did not want to be happy. 但是人家对他怎么样，他就不理他们。 And Mr. Bingley soon made himself acquainted with all the important people in the room. He was lively and unreserved. He danced every dance, and he was even angry that the ball closed so early, and talked of giving one himself at Netherfield. And so we could see the difference. 我们看这两个人都不一样。那 Mr. Darcy 是那种很骄傲的那种，很有钱的那种土豪。 但是宾利啊，那是宾利就是很优雅的，他真的是一个 gentleman。那我很想知道发生什么事。Now, there was a big contrast between Mr. Bingley and Mr. Darcy.
Mr. Darcy danced only once with Mrs. Hurst, and once with Miss Bingley, and declined being introduced to any other lady. It so happened that Elizabeth, the second eldest of the Bennet girls, had been obliged by the scarcity of gentlemen to sit down for 2 dances, and during part of that time, Mr. Darcy had been standing near enough to her to overhear a conversation between him and Mr. Bingley, who came from the dance for a few moments. "Come, Darcy," said he, "I must have you dance. I hate to see you standing about by yourself in this stupid manner. You had much better dance." "I certainly shall not. You know how I detest it, unless I am particularly acquainted with my partner. At such an assembly as this, it would be insupportable. Your sisters are engaged, and there is not another woman in the room whom it would not be a punishment to me to stand up with."
I would not be so fastidious as you are, cried Bingley. For a kingdom, upon my honor, I've never met so many pleasant girls in my life as I have this evening. And there are several of them you see, uncommonly pretty. 这里有很多漂亮的美女啊，你为什么不跳舞呢？你有机会啊。You are dancing with the only handsome girl in the room, said Mr. Darcy, looking at the eldest Bennet daughter, Jane. 他就觉得 Jane 漂亮而已。Oh, she is the most beautiful creature I ever beheld. But there is one of her sisters sitting down just beside you. He is very pretty. I dare say very agreeable. Do let me ask my partner to introduce me. 你要不要跟她一起跳舞吧？她真的很漂亮。 Which do you mean? Say all.
After turning around, he looked for a moment at Elizabeth, till, catching her eye, he withdrew his own, and coldly said, "Ha! She is tolerable, but not handsome enough to tempt me, and I am in no humor at present to give consequence to young ladies who are slighted by other men. You had better return to your partner and enjoy her smiles, for you are wasting your time with me." Mr. Bingley followed his advice. Mr. Darcy walked off, and Elizabeth remained, with no cordial feelings towards him. She told the story, however, with great spirit among her friends, for she had a lively, playful disposition, which delighted in anything ridiculous.
后来 Jane 跟 Elizabeth 跟很多女生在聊天的时候 Jane 说 Miss Bingley told me that Mr. Darcy never speaks much except among people he knows well. With them he is extremely agreeable. Huh, I don't believe a word of it, my dear. Everybody says that he is eaten up with pride, says Elizabeth. So Elizabeth 知道那个人真的很骄傲。
I do not mind his not talking to Mrs. Long, said Miss Lucas, but I wish he had danced with Eliza.
Ah, another time Lizzie said her mother, I would not dance with him if I were you. 因为大家都很讨厌那个 Darcy. His pride, said Miss Lucas, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. No one can be surprised that such a fine young man with family and fortune should think highly of himself. 那你觉得呢？你觉得有钱人呢？你觉得他们可以骄傲吗？这是我们讨论的事情。那后来呢 Eliza 说什么呢？她说 That's very true. And I could easily forgive his pride if he had not wounded mine. 所以我们从这个故事的第一部分我们都知道 Darcy 很讨厌 Eliza or Elizabeth. And Elizabeth 非常的讨厌他，他觉得他非常的骄傲。那后来你觉得会发生什么事呢？我们看一下第二部分。
Okay, so now we've looked at the first part of the story. Let's look at the vocabulary and some expressions. Now, the first word is property, which is like 财产. Okay, now the first sentence is, this is private property, so please do not climb over this fence. Let's read it one more time. This is private property, so please do not climb over this fence. You remember, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, don't climb over that fence because it is private property. We say this a lot. Okay, now the next sentence is really cool if you're like me and you love to read. You ready? The books are considered the property of the public library, so please treat them with care. Okay, 所以这些书都是图书馆的，所以卡塞里哦，要对他们有爱心哦。Okay, now the next word we're going to look at today is called estate. Now, an estate is a large way to say your land, okay? 你所有的财产, okay? Property, we just looked at, is part of your estate. Now, we almost always use this whenever someone passes away, or they die, or kick the bucket, like we say. Other people will inherit 遗产. They will inherit from you. Okay, so let's read this sentence. The old man divided his estate between his wife and daughter in his will before he died. In other words, before he kicked the bucket or bought the farm. Okay, let's look at the second sentence with estate. Bill never really had to work hard for his money because he inherited the family's estate from his parents. So we could say that Bill in Chinese would be 你们说什么？你们会说富二代, okay? And so we know that he's not really rich because he had to work hard, but he inherited his estate from his parents. So let's read this sentence again. Listen to my intonation. Bill never really had to work hard for his money because he inherited the family's estate from his parents. Now, what about you? Are you some rich kid, or are you somebody who has to learn English really hard with us so you can make more money and get a better estate. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the next word, which is very important for many of you. This word is single. 单身. Okay, so let's read the sentence, and you better learn this carefully. Please let me know if your sister is married or single, because I really want to get to know her better. Now I'm going to read the sentence quicker, and you can listen to my intonation. Are you ready? 1, 2, 3. Please let me know if your sister is married or single, because I really want to get to know her better. Okay? If you come to our Dr. J's Word Up Literature Lair a lot, then you can read just like that. Now, the next sentence that we're going to talk about with single is very interesting as well. Is that handsome man over there still single? I am not sure whether or not he's wearing a wedding ring. One more time, girls. Is that handsome man over there still single? I am not sure whether or not he's wearing a wedding ring. Okay, now the next sentence with single I included just for fun. I'm not wearing a rock on my finger, so you know that I'm single and ready to mingle. Now guys, if you can say this, everybody will think you are too cool for school. One more time. I'm not wearing a rock on my finger, so you know that I'm single and ready to mingle. Learn that. Trust me, you will really enjoy using it. Now we're going to talk about some words related to being single. Okay, now the first one is bachelor. Bachelor. A bachelor is a man who is single, and a bachelorette is a woman who is single. However, we almost never say bachelorette unless we're talking about the bachelorette party before the marriage happens. But usually we refer to the men as being bachelors. Is that man married? 那人结婚了，阿伯，他还是 bachelor, okay? 他还是单身贵族, okay? Now here's another sentence that you really should say if your girlfriend or boyfriend or partner's next to you. I am in a stable relationship. I am in a stable relationship. And that means 我是在一个非常非常稳定的关系其中. You need to say that if your boyfriend or girlfriend's next to you till they go to the bathroom, and then say, okay, here's the truth. It's not really as stable as you think. 很复杂, very complicated. But let's go on. Now this sentence I'm going to repeat because I personally think it's really cool. I'm single and ready to mingle. What that means is I'm single and I'm ready to talk to a lot of different people at this party. So let's get the party going. Now here's a sentence that many of you get depressed if you hear a guy or a girl say, I am engaged. I am engaged. What that means is hands off, boy, hands off, girl. I'm engaged to be married. Now here's another sentence that maybe will make you depressed as well. I am married. I am married. Okay. Now we're not going to talk about relationships today. This is not my job. The next thing we're going to talk about, though, is another very important word called manner. This is very important for me because I'm from the Southwest, from Texas, where we really need to follow manners very carefully. Here's an example sentence. My mother always insists that we use good manners whenever we interact with guests. One more time, a little bit quicker with a little bit of 连音. My mother always insists that we use good manners whenever we interact with guests. My mother always insists that we use good manners whenever we interact with guests. You need to be able to link sound, ladies and gentlemen. So come to Dr. J's Literature Lair with Word Up and we will link sound all day long. The next sentence is, please mind your manners and be more polite to other people. Please mind your manners and be more polite to other people. Now, another word that's very important if you're going to take a test is consist. This means to be made up of. This is very important for almost all tests. You will see it. Okay, my family consists of 8 people.
3 boys and 3 girls. Now the next sentence using consist is, my breakfast usually consists of cereal, fruit, and orange juice. Okay? You remember you have to eat healthy because health is wealth. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now we're going to look at a very important word with attention, because after all, everyone loves attention. And we're going to use attention with different verbs. And I want to thank the Word Up team for making these sentences for us. The first sentence is, his shiny new watch and fancy suit drew all of the criminals' attention to him as he walked down the dark alley. Now here's another sentence. My new white shoes drew more attention from other people than I had hoped when I wore them with a black suit. My new white shoes drew more attention from other people than I had hoped when I wore them with a black suit. Okay, now this is another way to use attention you really need to know if you want to draw other people's attention with your cool English. The beautiful dog drew the attention of all the children on the playground. The beautiful dog drew the attention of all the children on the playground. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now, like you already know, Pride and Prejudice has a lot of very important quotes that we say a lot in English. And this quote is about pride. You ready? His pride, said Miss Lucas, does not offend me so much as pride often does, because there is an excuse for it. One should not be surprised that such a fine young man with family and fortune should think highly of himself. That is very true, replied Eliza, and I could easily forgive his pride if he had not wounded mine. Now, ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I want to share with you some 4 free, fun, cool wedding expressions. Okay. One way we say of getting married is to get hitched. To get hitched. And after you get hitched, sometimes we call our husband, our wife, or girlfriend, or boyfriend your ball and chain. That is not a very nice way to say it, but it means like a punishment. You have to drag them everywhere where you're going. And we also have an expression that's really cool, is to put a rock on her finger. In other words, if you want to marry a girl, then you need to give her an engagement ring. And instead of saying diamond, a cool way to say is rock. Okay, so I really love her. I want to put a rock on her finger. And then another thing that some people say is they say, hey, you know, she's single and you really should try to tie her down. You should try to tie her down. And in this book, we have the expression very frequently to ask for her hand in marriage. This is an old way to say to ask someone to marry you. And then last but not least, we say, it's probably time for you to get down on your knees. And the reason is because you can propose to your girlfriend. Okay. Now, usually in my culture, it is the man who proposes to the woman, but society is changing. Sometimes women ask men to marry them too. Wow. This part 1 was pretty crazy because we had this rich guy from North England, Mr. Bingley, move in town and buy this fancy house. And he brought with him this kind of arrogant jerk named Darcy. And then they had this ball and they all danced together. But Mr. Darcy didn't want to dance with anyone, and it was kind of strange. And the important part about this one little section, though, is that here we start talking about pride, about how Elizabeth feels that Darcy has hurt her pride and looked down upon her. Let's see what happens in the next section, because I'm getting very curious myself. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we hope that you have enjoyed this very first segment of this incredible novel, and that you have learned a few phrases and vocabulary words. Just keep learning with us, because we're going to get your English to the next level.